Okay, N4H&H back here. So this is the FTdx10 from Yaesu, their newest offering to the high-frequency market. And so here we go. Joel, KC4WZB, was kind enough to drop this by. He just picked it up. He hasn't even opened it himself. Hasn't unboxed it. It's, oh, look at there, Yaesu. There you go. You get the Yaesu map that we've all become accustomed to. And let me see if I can get this out and work the camera at the same time. So, of course, you have the cables that we all expect to get with one of these. There's the microphone in there and the power cable. So the radio's here in some protective foam. There you go. The radio's also got some protective plastic over it, as it should. So yeah, fairly easy to unpack here, really. I will get it all hooked up, and then we'll shoot some video showing it in operation. Hello, N4H&H back with you here with the Yaesu FTdx10. I just unboxed it and set it up here on top of the SM5000 station monitor that is sitting atop my Yaesu FTdx5000 that you see me using so often. But this radio, the FTdx10, I believe it's going to be a game changer in the ham radio market, especially for radios that cost under $2,000. This thing is rated number 3 by Sherwood Engineering for reciprocal mixing dynamic range, which is a fancy way to say it's very selective on the receiver. So if you're using if you like to operate contest conditions, then this will be a radio that would allow you to reject signals up and down the band and give you a better chance at pulling out stations that you're trying to hear. And it is beat only by the Flex 6700, which is number 2 for reciprocal mixing dynamic range. And of course, this one has a big brother, the FTdx1010D, and then there's the 200 watt MP model, and that is the number 1 radio for RMDR. So RMDR number 1, FTdx1010D and MP, then Flex 6700, and then number 3 is this radio, the FTdx10. That's huge for a radio that costs under $2,000. So I'm going to go ahead and get some power to it. Let's see. First thing I'm going to do is remove this plastic here from the screen, because they recommend that you do that before you power the radio up. It's got some plastic up here as well, protecting some of these display devices. And so you want to get that off of there. Not a good idea to let things like that heat up with this plastic over it. Okay, and now let's see. I'm going to hold down the power button. There she goes. Yaesu FTdx10. Wow, that's a fast start, fast boot up. Okay, so I've got to learn my way around the thing. I've got the manual downloaded. Of course, there's one in the box too, but I usually download it and put it on my screen. So we'll get right into it here in just a few minutes. Hello, N4H&H back with you with the Yaesu FTdx10. We just unboxed it, powered it up. We saw the splash screen, as it's called, come up and say Yaesu, and then the model number FTdx10. And then we will see this screen. This is typical for a Yaesu radio when it boots up. And I noted it booted up fast, maybe seconds, and mere seconds. Typical Yaesu radios these days will power up and out of the box on 7 megahertz. So obviously you're gonna want to move that over to a frequency that is going to be not that this is not in the ham band, but let's go find a signal. I'm going to switch over to my ZS6 BKW antenna. Here's the volume control, lower left of the VFO, and then there's a ring for RF gain. Let's get up into the sideband portion here. So I'll probably be shooting a series of videos with this radio for various different conditions. But this is just an initial look at it. I've not read the manual. We'll see how intuitive it is. It, of course, starts up with the 3D spectrum scope, as you see 3DSS there. So, wow, let's see what happens if we tap that. Now you've got a traditional waterfall. There we go. All right, but it's known for this 3D spectrum scope here. So you see signals in a time domain. They'll work their way toward the back. You can see it doing that. Okay, so let's find a QSO. Okay, that's nice because it's not a real strong signal. So let's see what we can do with that. This is the 40-meter band. And on these lower bands like this, and if you've watched my channel very much, you'll know that I talk about signal-to-noise ratio. On 7 megahertz and lower, so the 40-meter, 60-meter, 80-meter, and 160-meter bands, we really don't need a lot of receive sensitivity. Radios these days have tremendous receive capabilities, very sensitive receivers. And on these lower bands, you're subject to a lot of QRN, so we really don't need to hear all that grind in the background. And if you've watched my channel enough, you know that I do not like that grind in the background. I'm known for taking the sideband signals and trying to get them to where they sound almost like you're listening to a repeater. So let's deal with that. You'll notice up here, ATT, attenuation, IPO, intercept point optimization, RFIL, roofing filter, and then AGC, automatic gain control. We'll leave the automatic gain control on auto. That generally does work best. But these are laid out in order of the receive chain, what I call the receive chain. So the very first opportunity you have to act on a signal coming in from your antenna is to attenuate it or not. Well, on these lower frequencies like this, where we've got, a noise level of S7 or S8 here, we can attenuate that. I'm going to tap attenuate and punch in 6 decibels. That's typical for a Yaesu radio to have 3 levels of attenuation, 6 dB, 12 dB, and 18 dB. Now you'll need to notice the S meter has dropped a little bit because we're dropping the amount of signal that we're allowing down the receiver chain toward the AGC. The AGC drives the S meter. So now we still have a lot of sensitivity. So let's go ahead and hit IPO, and we'll go to IPO instead of amp 1. It defaults at amp 1. Now what that is, let me explain. IPO is intercept point optimization. Already the waterfall's looking better, see, because we've dropped the noise floor down. The 3D spectrum scope. Got to get used to that, right? It's not a waterfall. It can be, right? You tap this button, you got a waterfall. But this one has the 3D spectrum scope, so you see the signals, and then you see the time domain as the signals, as the transmissions are on and off and things like that. So you can see them as they work their way to the back in a time domain. So intercept point optimization is the ability for us to lower the sensitivity of our receiver when we're on these low bands like this. We don't want to hear the QRN. We don't want to hear the magnetic flux that surrounds the globe, And so we'll lower the sensitivity of the receiver by doing something called intercept point optimization. Now that's Yaesu speak for turning off your RF amplifier. The very first stage of amplifying a received signal is a stage it's in the first IF, first intermediate frequency. Now let me talk about that. This radio is a software-defined radio, yes, but it also has the benefits of a super heterodyne front end. Now what that means is traditional radios would have multiple stages of what's called superheterodyne, where you beat two frequencies against one another to produce an intermediate frequency. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, selectivity. The more stages you do of that, the more selective your receiver can be, meaning that it can hear the signal you want to hear, but reject signals above and below that frequency. Now, the trade-off is with traditional receivers is that the more stages that you have, you'll hear dual superheterodyne or dual conversion, triple conversion, quad conversion. The more stages of that you have does benefit the receiver on selectivity, but it can hurt it. It can hamper it regarding the noise floor, something called phase noise. So each phase of the receiver can produce some noise. Now, modern superheterodynes like the FTdx1000 that this radio is sitting on top of right now have found some optimized ways to manage even the dual superheterodyne and the triple superheterodyne, making better selections of components, but also taking advantage of more modern, some of the modern technology in the components, but also too selecting different IF frequencies. And you'll hear terms like down conversion thrown around. So there have been some advances in the superheterodyne technology, and on that subject, I should mention that SDR is not necessarily better just because it's the newest technology. The superheterodyne has its advantages. When some of the software-defined radios first came out, they were suffering from front-end overload because direct sampling, you're just going out there and deciding of all the wavelengths that are hitting your antenna, which one do I want to hear? Well, ideally, you really want to narrow down before, right as quickly as you can off the antenna. You want to narrow down to a frequency range, a spectrum that you want to start picking from, and so that's your first opportunity to be selective in your receiver. So the SDRs were prone to, I guess I'll use a joke. You hear a lot of times they could hear DC to daylight. They hear just so many frequencies, and all that's bombarding the front end of your receiver. And so they were subject to interference because of that and front end overload. You would see like a little light flash up and, essentially indicating some distortion. So I even thought about it back then. I said, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had the benefits of a superheterodyne front end on a radio, and then we go over to the SDR chip. And about a year or so later, after I'd mentioned that to a couple of friends, Yaesu comes out with the block diagram for the FTdx10, and they wound up calling that a hybrid. And so, in fact, that is what they've done. They've created a radio that has a superheterodyne front end. So you've got some benefits there from selectivity, and then you also couple that to a SDR chip. So you've got the benefits of SDR, and then I call it a third stage of that, and that is the DSP, the digital signal processing. So you're looking at a radio right now in front of you that has the benefits of superheterodyne front end, has also the SDR chip, and then also has digital signal processing, just like its big brother, the FTdx10. Now, by the way, the major difference between this radio and the 101, because they share the same technology, the same screen, the big difference is that the FTdx10 is simultaneous dual receive. So it can listen to two frequencies simultaneously. There's also an FTdx10. There's the D, which is a 100-watt version. There's the MP, which is a 200-watt version. And then additionally, the 101 series has a variable pre-selector built in called VC Tune, Variable Capacitance Tune. And if you watch some of my videos in the past regarding pre-selectors, such as the Mu Tuner, the VRF pre-selector, and I've even talked about, ICOM's IC7610 has a pre-selector called Digicel, digital selector. So that type of technology is existing in some of the higher end radios. Okay, this radio does not have that, but interestingly enough, I should say, it rates number 3 on Sherwood Engineering's list for reciprocal mixing dynamic range, RMDR. That is the measure of a radio's ability to reject signals 2 kilohertz away. So I can't wait to get into this receiver and just see how fabulous it is at doing that, because it's doing it without having one of those variable preselectors. And if you haven't watched the previous videos, in a nutshell, the variable preselectors are even narrower than the width of the band. So you've got a bandpass filter in these radios that will say, I'm on 40 meters now, I only want to pass the 40 meter band through. That's typical with the super heterodyne receivers. But the variable preselector narrows down even more so within the band, and therefore it's variable, so you can move it up and down within the band. Okay, so the FTdx10 has that. It's called VC Tune. This radio doesn't, but get this. The FTdx10 is the number 1 radio in the world right now, according to Sherwood Engineering's lab tests, for, we'll call it selectivity, because that's what it's a measure. It's called reciprocal mixing dynamic range, but it's a measure of the selectivity. It's number 1, the FTdx10, the radio that this is based upon. Number 2 is the Flex 6700, as of right now while I shoot this video, and March 18th, 2021. Number 3 is the radio you're looking at, the FTdx10. So that's quite an accomplishment for a radio, especially in this price range, to be that good, third on the Sherwood list. It's besting a long list of some great radios to reach that number 3 spot. And think of it this way: you've got to spend over $3,000 to get a radio that can beat this one on RMDR, and there's only 2: the Flex 6700 and this radio's big brother, the FTdx1001D or MP. This radio is priced right now at $1,700. This is a game changer. I mean, to get this much technology in a radio that costs less than $2,000. Okay, enough talking. Let's listen a little bit. So what I've done is I've ATT, attenuation 6 dB IPO, to drop that noise floor down. That's not bad. I might even consider just even go 12 dB of attenuation to get rid of some of that grind as well. Because I like to work the noise floor down to 0. Can't understand him. Knob feels good. BFO. It's got an outer ring too. We'll explore some of what that does in a future video. Well, I want to find a QSO we can understand here. Ah, here we go. So, attenuating at 12 dB, intercept point optimization is engaged. We're using a 3 kilohertz roofing filter. So if you're new to the hobby, a roofing filter is another one of those opportunities to narrow down the width. So we're using a bandpass filter for 40 meters. So we're listening to a bandpass filter that is type of preselector, if you will. It's selecting frequencies in the 7 megahertz band and passing those along. And then after the first stage of amplification, or IF, which we have turned off right now, the amplification part of that, you have what's called a roofing filter. And those vary in width. This one's 3 kilohertz wide because sideband occupies approximately 3 kilohertz of bandwidth. You know, you may transmit with your transmit bandwidth at 2.4 or 2.8, but we'll generally set our receiver with to a roofing filter of 3. Now, you can digitally narrow that down using the DSP, which is why, you know, it's not necessary to have other mechanical filters in the radio, because this is a mechanical filter here, an actual component. as opposed to doing it in a digital signal processor. The 3 kilohertz roofing filter is appropriate here for sideband. Now, if you were doing CW, you'd probably want a 600 hertz roofing filter, and some radios even offer, down to 300 and even 250. So that's appropriate for sideband, 3 kilohertz. AGC auto, that automatic gain control is the circuit in the radio that helps smooth out voice peaks so that everything sounds, reasonably, the same. So you're not having to work your volume control so much. Auto is generally the best setting for that. When you switch over to CW, it'll probably automatically switch it over to fast. That's you want the automatic gain control to be quick on CW because of the, the spiking up and down of the Morse code. So one of the other things you can do here is roll the RF gain back, and on a Yaesu radio, that's going to bring the S meter up, and essentially, but it's going to lower the background noise. Essentially, what you're doing is you're telling the radio, unless it's stronger than S5, I don't want to hear it. Now, don't get me wrong. If somebody's S3 or 4, you'll probably still hear them, but lighter. So up here on the top right, to the right of the VFO, we have an outer ring, and then we have an inner. The outer ring here is the width. And look, the display will automatically come up, and see I'm narrowing. So we have a 3 kilohertz roofing filter, and there we are at 3,000 hertz or 3 kilohertz, but we can now digitally narrow it. And that will help when we've got that bleed over from the other station. See, hear it? I'm going down to 1800 and I'm knocking that down. Now I may turn the shift, since it's high pitched. Hear it? Turn the shift to the left. Since it's a high pitched QRM, that will then shift where the center point is of that particular bandpass filter there. The shift is a type of filter. What it is it's taking this width here of 1800 hertz, and we're moving it around to decide where we want to center up that 1800 hertz width filter. Now, when you narrow your filter like that, of course, it thins the audio of the receiving station. But the idea here is I want to be able to hear the person I'm talking to. I'm no longer concerned about whether they sound like, full stereo. I just want them to be intelligible. We've had some storms go through the day. I'm still hearing a little bit of static crashes from those in the distance. Okay, this video is getting a little bit long. I don't want it to go too long, so I'm going to break this up into segments, of course. But here we are. We're powered up. We've tuned in some stations. We've optimized the receiver to cut down on some of the noise. I mean, we haven't even gotten into things that the radio has, like, the digital noise reduction and things like that. So I'll turn it on, just give you a preview there. DNR. Now listen to that. DNR, digital noise reduction. Not to be confused with noise blanker. Noise blanker takes care of like power line noise, things that are pulsing at a constant rate. Digital noise reduction is going into that digital signal processor, and it is, wow, listen to that. Let's see what his real signal is. Wow, see what I mean? You can still hear him even though the needle was down around 1 to 2. Now, bear in mind, that's not his real S meter reading because I've got attenuation 12 dB and I've got IPO turned on. But the idea is signal to noise ratio. We've got him now to where we're hearing virtually nothing unless there's a lightning crash. So there's an idea of digital noise reduction. Just pressing it and it did the job. We haven't even adjusted it yet. So we'll do that in a future video, but I'm going to end this one here, and then we'll pick it up with a future video. We'll do some more digging around into the capabilities of this radio. Already I'm very impressed with the abilities that it has to, I mean, that digital noise reduction, that's incredible there. One of the keys to noise reduction, I'll end it with this, is that you want to work your attenuation and your intercept point optimization and your RF gain control. Try to get the noise down as low as you can before you even turn on the digital noise reduction. I'll turn it off again so you can see. See, we worked it down to that level just with attenuation and IPO and RF gain. And then we'll put the icing on the cake using the digital noise reduction. And again, that's just out of the box. I haven't adjusted that. That's just turning it on as it is. So we'll end the video there, and we'll get into the details of digital noise reduction in a future video, and we'll explore the rest of what this radio has to offer. So let's recap. We powered the radio up. We found a QSO. We're on the 40-meter band, so there was a lot of QR Nancy. So we used attenuation, 12 dB, intercept point optimization. Again, what we're doing is we're lowering the sensitivity of the receiver nearest to the antenna, but that's the best place to attack noise first. And then we rolled the RF gain control back a little bit. You see it's on S5, right around S5. So we're saying to the receiver, you know, unless it's an S5 or more, I really don't want to hear it. Again, it's not a brick wall. You'll probably still hear an S3. You will. But it'll be a little bit less volume, but it's also masking out that noise floor. And I'll see. One of the best inventions for radio, the RF gain. So I think he's finished talking now, but we put the icing on the cake with the digital noise reduction. Remember, this is what we were left with after we attenuated. So I'm going to turn all that off. There he is back. So there's the defaults. So now we'll go to attenuation, 12 dB, intercept point optimization, roll the RF gain back. See, he's deflecting the meter at 1 to 2, but even if I roll it back to 5, I can still hear him. And now we put the icing on the cake. Listen to this. Digital noise reduction. So the signal goes through the digital signal processor, DSP unit, and it separates his voice from noise and subdues the noise. It's just a tremendous feature in these Yaesu radios, and they have the best digital noise reduction of any of the radios that I've had the opportunity to test in real world conditions. So that's great. We'll leave you on that note. Wow, he sounds great. I'm impressed with what I'm seeing so far out of this Yaesu FTdx10. I want to thank my Patreons for helping me keep this channel going, and I sure hope that you will continue to support the channel as we grow. And if you would, like the video and subscribe, that also helps. And if you want to become a Patreon, please do. It's www.patreon.com/N4HNH. And this is N4HNH saying 73.